Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and for this week we are going to be taking a look at Bill's Tomato Game, which is probably the oddest title of a game I've ever seen or covered before, but before we jump onto that, let's have a look at some news first. Now this is quite interesting because it's site related. Basically last week I mentioned that I was going to be running a poll on whether or not I should do a CD32 sort of history special episode. Now I've had quite a lot of responses to that, so thank you to everybody who's voted. Offered a simple choice: either do you want me to stick to the games, or would you like me to go off and do something like this, like a special? I say it's only an idea at the moment, but I've got a fair bit of the history and I've got some books and notes and things, so it's something I would like to do, but I didn't want to approach that because I know what people are like with podcasts. It's like if they veer too far off course, some people get upset and it puts them off, but I'm happy to report that I didn't get a single negative vote. People are quite happy with me to do that, so I don't know when, but I'm going to start putting the notes together properly now, and I'll come up with an episode as soon as I possibly can. Something else that did come to note, especially with like mentions on Facebook, and just because I like put posts out about each episode as I release it, but a few people have been commenting over on the Commodore Amiga group over on Facebook, and I've also seen it myself on a few like YouTube comments that I have. There's seems to be this bit of confusion about me being just a YouTube channel and putting up regular videos, but this is probably a hard one to explain, really. I mean, we're not. We are actually a podcast. When we first started running when I started first doing the episodes, I would record all the audio first, and then for weeks, I think up to about episode 9, episode 10, there was no game footage or anything like that because it was just me talking. And the idea would be that I would push it out as an audio podcast on like iTunes and devices and stuff like that. And then as time went on, I suddenly realised that no, it'd be much better on the website at least to have some sort of like video footage that makes sense and when I'm talking about a game, because it's all audio and people can't really see it, and I sort of like put the two together and put it out there. And that's why if you go to AMIGArama.com you can see both on the same page. But I think some people have come to it from the YouTube side and they just look at it and seem a bit confused, and they don't pick up on the fact that this is a podcast. You know, it's meant for carrying about. It's not meant to be like me looking at, say, my own game footage and talking over it and explaining what it's about and stuff like that. So I just wanted to try and clear that up. We're basically a podcast. I've said that already a million times already, but we're not focused on gameplay or footage or anything like that. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you're actually listening to what is pushed out there as effectively a radio show with some video footage stuck on top. But I film it all myself, so it is effectively me like doing a YouTube video, but I'll try and be more clear about that in future. Maybe I've just not been shouting out podcast enough at the beginning and people just haven't picked up on it. Now, next up, I noticed that Amiga J has been extremely busy again. He's gone and released something else for the CD32. This time it's called the 4 Decades of Amiga Demos version 0.2. Now, 4 decades straight away, that sounds like a hell of a lot. I mean, just off my own Amiga system alone, I've got hundreds of them stacked up there. I mean, I'm trying to work my way through, but it's taking me weeks and weeks, and I'm still on the letter B at the moment. I'm not really getting anywhere, but I'll work my way through. But this is really fascinating, but apparently in this update there's an extra 101 new demos. 44 of those are fast RAM only, while the other 57 will work on stock CD32s too. Now, if you're not aware, the CD32 effectively is a standard or stock Amiga 1200 just in the box. You can buy very expensive like add-ons to make it run faster, but most of the time you're just stuck with the stock stuff. And what Amiga J does is he tends to grab like loads of Amiga games, and like with this one with the demos, and puts them on a very handy like multi-disc for people to run this stuff. You can't really, it's not something you run on the A1200. I think I might have said that in the past, but I was a bit confused. But looking at it more closely, it's all about the CD32 and running all this stuff on a console. But anyway, so yeah, he's brought out this demo disc. It looks absolutely fantastic. There's so many demos that can be run, and the fact that he's achieved a lot more and much faster demos, I think, will run on the stock edition. That's something that's not really been possible before. So I haven't got a CD32, I'm afraid. I've had them in the past, but when you've got a standard A1200 setup, you don't really need it anymore. Next up, it's not really Amiga news, but it's sort of Amiga related. I just noticed this in passing, that Slipgate Studios are basically developing a new 90s style platform, and now looking at it visually, they've been saying that this is for the PS4 and the Xbox One, but what they've presented so far in video and pictures and stuff, it looks very, very, very similar to Rough and Tumble, like that proper classic, like run and gun shooter for the Amiga. So yeah, that's Slipgate Studios. I'll post a link into the description. It's really, really good footage, and it really is that style and the big like Magic Pocket style character and the way it looks and everything. It's very, very styled around like that early to mid 90s platformers. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And with that, it's time to move on to this week's game. Now, for this week, I wanted to go with something, I don't know how to put this, a bit more light-hearted and not as in-depth as something of like Frontier Elite, which we did last week, because, God, that's been my longest episode so far, and I spent weeks putting time into playing that and doing the research and stuff. But not that I'm not going to do the same with what we're doing this week, which is Bill's Tomato game. But as you can probably tell from the title, it's not as in-depth as a flight sim or a space shooter or anything like that. Now, this is something I'm very familiar with as a kid, but I completely forgot about it. It's just by chance that I was having a chat on Twitter and some people were suggesting some games and covers, and this popped up, and I just remembered it like a flash. I mean, I remember spending absolutely hours on it. It was one of them games we were obsessed with as a kid, and I went around to other friends and played with it. And I think at the time I'd just seen a film called, I think it was like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and it was basically this, I can't remember much about it, but I've always remembered that title. I might even be wrong about the title, which just shows you how bad my memory is, but it was just this crazy B-movie where these killer tomatoes went after everyone. I think it was based in the US, but it might have been filmed in Mexico or something like that. And I need to look that film up. I don't even know what I'm warbling on about, but it was just one of them things that at the time as a kid just stuck in my mind. And when I saw the cover, and I remember it for the box for Bill's Tomato game, and there was a boy tomato and girl tomato running down this street, and it was all fantastic artwork on a Psygnosis box, and it really stood out to me. It's Indiana Jones like in a way, and it reminded me of that film, so I was hooked at the time, so I just had to play it. Anyway, you've not guessed already, the publisher is Psygnosis. We have covered them like a million times before. I'm always worried that I do too many of the Psygnosis games, but the problem is they've just done so many classics. There is some poor games mixed in there, of course. I mean, there is with all publishers, but I do worry that I might be going a bit too heavy on the Psygnosis side. So if anyone's any problems, well, you know where to come to. Just drop me a line on at AMIGArama pod. We'll try and cover more games anyway as we keep going. But again, the great thing about Psygnosis, they just did so many different types of games, and I mean, flight simulators, puzzles, platformers, sports games, I think, pretty much you name it, they did it. Now, this was developed by Bill Pullan. I might have pronounced that wrong, but as you can probably tell, Bill's Tomato game, the main character isn't called Bill, so it's got to be the developer who came up with this. It came out in 1992. From what I could tell, it's on 2 floppy disks. Now, I only know that because I was looking for different ADF cracks, as I usually do, and every single place I looked, it had 2, but a lot of the magazine reviews I went to for the time all said it was on 1 disc, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. It was priced at £25.99. Now, the entire game was coded by Bill Pullen, and he only ever did 2 other games. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. Now, that's a conversion of the classic arcade cabinet, and which is supposed to be a very, very good game, so thumbs up to him there. And then the other one he did was a game called Aqua Ventura. Now, one thing I did notice when I was looking these up is they're both like three-dimensional like landscape shooters, that sort of thing, crawling around a landscape. It's all in 3Ds, these towers and building of things flying towards you and lots of shooting and stuff. So he certainly was expert at that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a surprise that he ended up doing something like this. You'll understand when I go into it, because it's quite a simple game, really. The graphics were done by just 2 people. Gary Burley. Now, he was responsible for a game called Theatre of Death, which is sort of like, it was like an isometric shooter, a bit like Commando, but switched to an angle and stuff. It looked okay when I had a quick glimpse at it. Next up was Lee Carrest Westcott. Now, he only did 1 other game besides this, which was Red Zone. Now, that's a 3D bike racer, a bit like Days of Thunder, that sort of look. It looked really good from the previous stuff and the footage I saw. It might be something I'll cover eventually, but again, these are just old people seem to have just done 1 or 2 Amiga games, which is, considering the type of games they've done, is very, very strange, because they really have been involved in some complicated and great stuff as well. Now, the game itself, it was ported to the Sega Mega Drive. From what I could find out, it was actually due to be released in 1994, but for some unknown reason, it was cancelled. But weirdly, a prototype was found, which was later sold on eBay for around about £1,000. But luckily, I think either the person who bought it, or maybe the person selling it, I'm not sure there. It doesn't actually tell you from what I could see online. But a ROM was dumped, and you can actually play this. It's available on lots of ROM places and even online to this day. But it's pretty much the same game, and it works and everything, but just with a controller. I don't think this is really the controller sort of game, so maybe that's why they just never thought it was a good idea to bring it out. It's a mouse-driven game, so it's quite odd for that. One thing I did realise as I was doing the research, that the back of the box and pictures of it, it's actually got like a Heinz label, that very distinctive shape. If you're not in the UK, you might not recognise that, but Heinz to us over here, it's like the brand of like ketchup and sauces, and they pretty much do everything. But like Heinz tomato ketchup is the #1 brand, I think, in the UK for like table condiments, that sort of thing. But it's quite funny to look on the back of the box and see this, like the familiar shape to it, and you know what it is straight away. And at first I thought, well, that's a bit cheeky, but it's just a bit of fun and it's what they're hinting at. But then I started digging a bit deeper, and it turns out that they did actually include a free packet of Heinz tomato ketchup. I mean, what an awesome inclusion. I mean, who the hell would want some free tomato sauce with a game about a tomato? I mean, it just shows you they were so desperate for publicity. The first thing they could scrabble onto, they went for, and it was Bill's tomato game. I just thought that was fantastic. As the game opens, it introduces you to the whole world and the story by doing this fantastic, it's almost cartoon-like animation, and you basically see this like cartoon Acme truck driving down a road, and then it pans to the inside, and as it's passing the shops, you see them all. There's things like Mike's Hi-Fi Shop, and it's very like 90s and that typical shop street, and even up in one of the windows there's a couple of guys playing on an Amiga. Can't really see what game it is, but I suspect it's a Psygnosis one. But yeah, it looks absolutely great, and it flicks inside and you see a big pile of tomatoes all lay about with the door slightly open, and there's 2 of them sat there, Terry and Tracy, and fantastic name straight away, and they look really worried because they don't want to leave the farm where they've been taken to. So it then flicks forward a bit and they jump out of the back of the truck, and you see them bouncing along. I mean, you think straight away, if they're coming out of the back of the truck, they're going to get splattered, but no, they survive and manage to bounce all the way over to the farm. Now, this is pretty much where the manual takes over. But at this point, it's like a squirrel. I don't know what it is. It looked more like a bat to me. I couldn't really tell. But it swoops down, picks up Tracy and steals her away and leaves you stuck at the bottom of this big, it looks like a tree, but it's probably a tomato tree. I'm not entirely sure. And you just sat there bouncing around. And this is where the manual picks up. It says, "We join Terry Tomato squapping, the tomato equivalent of hopping, up and down in anger. Yeah, okay, so Tracy wasn't everybody's idea of the perfect mate to dive into a salad with." Oh my god. So she was a little too saucy with the boys, but that didn't matter. Oh, what am I reading? All that was behind her now because she was Terry's girlfriend and they loved each other. And so, Terry set off in hot pursuit, determined to track down the evil squirrel who Tomato napped. Oh my god. Tracy and squap up and down on his head to bring him to justice, wherever that may be. He swooped up onto the first branch and was so hassled by a low-flying wasp that he tumbled back down to the ground again. Much more of that, he thought, and I'll be puree. And with that, we join the game. A furious Terry sizes up the vine and attempts to scale its lower branches. Now, straight away, this is not the deepest of stories and there's no voices or anything. But my God, mixed in with the cartoon and the visuals, this is absolutely fantastic. I knew it was for something special. Now, the game itself is a nice and simple 2D puzzler. It sounds like a platformer straight away. When you start off on the opening screen, you do have control of Terry. You can move him around with the mouse. It has like a hover in a direction, it moves like an arrow, and if you hold the left mouse button, he will move around, but that's not the main game. That's just a level select. So you bounce up a couple of branches, go into a level, and then it introduces you. Now, the look of each stage, like I say, it's 2D side on. You basically have got Terry always sat off to the left on a spring, and then off to the right you'll have a conveyor belt, and the entire purpose of each stage is just to get through that section and get him onto the other side. Now, to help you along with this, you've got a huge bar of icons along the bottom. The lower left has an item select, so you can pick what you want to use in the level to get him through. You then get a traffic light with red and green on, which basically stops Terry. So if you click go when you're on the start spring, it'll bounce him off the spring and push him forwards. But you can also use that during the level to stop him and then restart him depending on what's going on. You've also got a number of tries for the current session shown, number of lives that you've got, and if you run out, it's simply game over. Points which you can collect for more live, typical for a game, and then a nice big timer, and all of this in text is all nice and red. One thing this game did remind me of, especially for the style, is something called The Incredible Machine, which was, I think, was like a DOS or a Windows game back in the day. And basically the entire idea is you've got a few tools. You have to get from point A to B and work your way through it. You've got to time it all incredibly well without getting stuck in the traps. Now, the first couple of stages are quite simple, as you would expect, but even I got stuck on about the third or fourth stage. I mean, the thing is, once you've got the puzzle, you'll know how to do it, but there's still an added element of skill, because what you've got to do is, you've got several items, so let's just start, with the first one is a fan, and when you jump up in front of the fan, it just blows you forward, and you have to get to the exit. So you place a couple of fans about, and you have to time it perfectly, so you pass one fan, then a second, and then you fall down to get to the exit on the other side. Which sounds nice and simple enough. Now, the entire thing is mouse driven. It's not like it was before where you could move Terry about by, bouncing him a direction or anything like that. You're completely dependent on the start and stop. There's no actual direct control over him as a character, which sounds a bit odd, but the entire point of this is it plays like a puzzler. You've got to puzzle your way through this 2D environment in the time limit without dying too many times. Now, the whole game takes place across the entire world, that's very odd to say, but it's very, very strange because you're supposed to be in this farm and then it's like you're going into different environments, and then the background is places like the desert or China. It's very, very weird backgrounds. When you first start off, it's just like a factory or a barn environment, and it makes sort of sense. But the further you get into the game and the later levels, it completely changes and it gets stranger and stranger. I think there's 7 or 8 main levels and there's 10 levels or spin-off levels to that. So there's a lot of puzzles to do. You know, it will take you several hours to get through this. I think from what I was looking online, you're looking to 3 to 4 hours if you know the solution. So that's one hell of a game, for especially just for a couple of discs. Despite having so many levels, there's not all that many items to actually use in the world. You've got the fan, which is forward blowing. There's a reverse blowing fan. A trampoline. Basically, if you fall on that after you bounced, it bounces you back up in the air off in a direction. A clown trampoline. If you land on that and move across, a little clown pops up and throws you off in a direction. It's always the same direction, by the way. It's not that exciting. There's no difference between the two. And then something like, it's like a steel box, but to me it looked like it had a first aid cross on it, but it doesn't do that. It just, if you hit it, it's like a wall. You just either bounce off or stop dead in a corner or something. And that's pretty much it for the entire game. And you have to work your way through these levels with all the various traps. And I mean, lots of these sections of levels, they actually move. There's things like rolling balls through the end, other conveyor belts, things that blow up, things that crush you. Just everything you can think of to take out of this tomato. I mean, poor Terry, the amount of things you have to put up with. Most of the stages tend to be on a single screen, but some of the later ones do actually scroll to some degree, and they tend to not be. I think the biggest I saw, and that was after a couple of hours, was probably about 3 screens equivalent going across. But most of the puzzles are quite small and contained, so it's not too bad. Because the problem is, when you've got to set up a long level like that, and it is limited by the amount of items you can use. None of them are limited, so it's not an unlimited number. You'll get, say, 3 or 4 per level, depending on what you need to do. So you have to plan it out properly. And if you get stuck in the middle somewhere, you're pretty much dead, and that's the end of it. If you stop for too long, he actually dies. So there is it's not like I'm to bang a key to reset the game, anything. Although there's lots of world stages, and some of the really bizarre ones are like, it looks like something out of the 60s with all the psychedelic colours and swirls going on in the background. It's very, very bizarre to look at. I mean, Terry himself does actually react to things that are going on. I mean, he'll smile, he'll look cross if he just comes close to dying. It's a very satisfying splat on the ground whenever you kill him. Now, you will kill him a lot. There's an awful lot of deaths in this game, but all of it, every time you see it, it's usually entertaining enough to just chuckle it off and then move on to the next one. Every stage is very, very colourful. It's bright, it's breezy, and it's very attractive, and it almost looks like a cartoon, especially for the time. And I was very, very impressed with the whole graphical look at it, and it doesn't let up. Graphics are one thing, but the fantastic thing about this as well is it has some really, really good music. Quite surprising as well for what is basically just a simple puzzle game, but they really have gone the extra mile with this. And the music for each one tends to match what you're actually in. Like, there's a graveyard type background to, or a graveyard area, and it's like a thriller-like tune, and it's very spooky, and it really draws you in, and each environment is different, and the main ditty for the game is quite entertaining as well. It's all very cartoony, and a lot of it feels like Looney Tunes. It really is that sort of the Acme crazy over-the-top cartoon style, and the graphics never let up. The intro movie that you see does actually match the graphics that you see for the rest of the game, and as you can probably tell already, I was quite impressed with the general look of it. It really was a fantastic to go through. Of course, this shouldn't mean that it doesn't have any problems. First, well, it's not really a problem as such, but there's no saving it whatsoever. You do get a password every time you complete a level, and they're only about 5 or 6 letters long. You know, it's usually a word, so it's nothing too overly complicated, but for the sake of somebody coding the option maybe to stick a floppy disk in and save, it would have just been a lot easier. I mean, if you're playing on an emulator, I suppose you're not going to really be stuck with that because you've got instant save anyway through the program. The time limit that comes with each level, it can be a bit frustrating, I found, because I mean, a lot of the time you do have plenty of tries within a level, but you've got to really focus, work out the solution, test it over and over. And sometimes I just felt that having a time limit there really push you to do it quickly, but at the same time, because you've got so many chances, you can come back, it sort of doesn't work. But the great thing, in a way, it does give you a sense of having to rush. You really need to focus. I mean, you will die a hell of a lot. I mean, I don't know why they just didn't mix into the story with it being multiple tomatoes. I mean, especially with the cartoon intro where they showed a truck full of them, but it's all based on little Terry. There is an option to use the keyboard to control it. I did try this to some degree, but it was awfully fiddly, and the mouse just feels a lot more natural. I can only imagine what this would have been like on, say, like the Sega Mega Drive, where you were using that controller. I don't think it would have worked, to be honest. It would have been a bit too awkward, and as it usually is, controlling a cursor with a joypad. One of the other problems with it is, I mean, it is a fun game and a lot of fun with it, but the levels can be awfully samey. And what I mean by that is, after a while, you end up with all the items. There isn't a great selection of them. There's probably like 5, if that, and then as you get further and further, and it takes you ages you're going through, you don't get any new items, at least not from what I've seen on the couple of hours I was playing through. It never really expands, and all the puzzles, and they are different to a degree. I mean, well, within the sense that they've got a lot of things going on around each level, but you've only got the same items, and it would have been more interesting if they come up with a few more ideas. I've got one thing I've got noted, I don't know why, but the clown trampoline is actually called Jeremy. Now, I'm not sure why you would call a trampoline Jeremy, but it made me scratch my head, so what can I say? Yeah, another thing that's not really a problem, but I've put down that it's far too addictive. I mean, you don't want to spend too much time on it, but I kept firing it up, and I've 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, 30 minutes there, and then I did this over a few nights. But most of the puzzles, if you get your logical cap on, you can pretty much work your way through them quickly, and there is a lot of experimenting and lining things up, like lining the fans up and then the boxes and the trampolines and stuff, but most of the levels are fairly quick and straightforward, and you will get through them, because the odd head scratcher along the way where you really can get stuck. I mean, there was one in particular, it was like a big 1-ton weight was squishing down, and it's like a little pathway underneath the tomato, and you had to make him jump up, fling him across with the fans, and then stop him on the other edge with a rock, and then drop down on his trampoline to go up. But the thing is, the 1-ton weight in the middle that was going up and down was really quick, and you had to time this perfectly. And I can't say just how many times and how many attempts it took me just to get through that section. It was quite annoying. That's probably a good thing for the game. Another issue I did have with it was the way you have to place the items throughout every stage. And yeah, I get the idea of it, because you're having to do it to solve a puzzle, but a lot of the time there isn't really any leeway, and you've pretty much got to get it exact, which is fine if it's quite straightforward. But when it's something like you're bouncing your tomato up and down, and then you have to use the fans to push him off in the right direction. If you're too close to the fans, you get squashed. If you're just too far away, it doesn't really work. And a lot of the time, you just sat there inching the fans a couple of, like few pixels forward, test it, switch it on, go, straight up, squish, try again, line it up a bit more, try it again, squat, and you had to keep doing that over and over and over again. It wasn't a big problem per se, but it was quite annoying, and some of the levels I just thought they were a bit too exacting, and it was more frustrating than fun to actually to get through. Another thing I really didn't enjoy, I mean, I like the idea of it with the level select being where you could use the mouse to control him as if he's a character to select the different levels, and it was a fine idea, but it's too cramped, there's not enough going on, and the platforms aren't really very well defined, and you can quite easily miss the beginning of the stalks going off the side of the tree. which is it's not a major issue. You could just fall to the floor and squat and you could try again, but it's just annoying and it doesn't really add anything to the game, and it's not like the rest of the game is a platformer. I'm to focus on that, so I'd probably like something else just for the level select. Its biggest problem as well is there's not really any continues. You run out of time, I think, and then it's a game over and you run out of tries and lives and things. But because you're pretty much getting a password every single level, and the fact that you've got a keyboard in front of you, you can pretty much just go back to the main menu, type the password and just go back to it. And they might as well have just stuck either an option in for continues or even add infinite continue, because it doesn't really matter. It just makes it a tad bit more annoying. The magazines at the time were actually quite kind to this. Amiga Format gave it 88%, Amiga Action the same at 88%, The One 82%, Amiga Power 81%, and Amiga Computing came the lowest, down at 80%. And to be honest, it's quite understandable. It's not an amazing game by any means, but it's perfectly enjoyable. Again, it's not the sort of game you want to sit there and do in a single sitting, because it can become very samey and a bit frustrating and probably annoying to that degree. But if you take it in short bursts, it can be a lot of fun. I mean, the style of it, especially for a puzzle game, it's not like, say, Lemmings or anything like that, but it's very, very different to these sort of games. And it's probably one of the more original games of this type that I've actually covered. But again, my biggest problem with it is the repetition. It can be a bit monotonous, and it just felt like it needs a bit more variety, a lot more going on in the levels. I would have liked some extra sort of items, just something to push the game out a bit more, to do a bit more exploring and give you more things to do. And I get that it's just a simple puzzler, but it wouldn't have really taken much more to come up with different things. I mean, they did it in stuff like Lemmings. They could have surely done it for good old Bill. One of the other things I felt about it feels like one of them old Flash games that you used to get on PCs back in the day. I suppose you still play them on the internet and stuff. It's very, very simplistic, but it's very well designed. It's colourful, it's bright, it looks fantastic. It's got great music, some good sound effects. It's very humorous, does keep you going back. I mean, the humour is, there's no ongoing story or script or thing. It's just from the designer levels and the look and the things that happen. And it's just an entertaining experience all around. And I did have a pretty good time with it, but coming away from it, I just wasn't fully satisfied. It just felt like there was that little bit extra missing. I have said that before about a fair few games, but again, I can understand why the magazines gave this something in the 80%, as this. It's almost there. It just needed a bit more tweaking around the edges, and we could have had something really special. Instead, we're just left with this. But yeah, what more can I say? Anyway, with that, I think that's the perfect time to finish the show. If you'd like to see some gameplay footage, you can pop along to AMIGArama.com, because I post them up there for every episode that I do. You can also drop me an email if you have any comments about the show, or just want to come out with ideas for future episodes, and that's at lefarius@amigarama.com. God, I almost forgot my own email address then. Or you can follow me on Twitter, which is @AmigaRamaPod. Until next time, guys.